The famous ziggurat, of course, was the central temple, and many gods were worshipped. Nebuchadnezzar built many altars, temples, sanctuaries, and it was a very polytheistic society, a very sophisticated society. The literature and the language was something that, at that time, the Akkadian language was basically the lingua franca of the world, like English is today. Anyone doing commerce, anyone doing any kind of diplomatic relations would be communicating in that language. And so the Babylonian Empire not only spread, but it was very influential as well.
Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the idea that he was only the head of gold. He wanted to be the whole thing. And so he set up a great image of gold where the whole thing was of gold in Daniel chapter 3, the very next chapter, and he had a lot of his people bow down and worship. Now, William Shea has pointed out that this was possibly a time of conflict in the empire when there was some possible disloyalty to Nebuchadnezzar going on, so he was having everyone pledge loyalty to him.
When you read the document coming from Babylon, we discover that in about 10th year of his reign, a rebellion broke out. And rebellion was so severe at one point in his court that the text says that he had to take his own sword and defend his own life. Fortunately, soldiers came in and he was able to survive this rebellion. And of course, those involved were punished, executed. But the problem was Nebuchadnezzar did not know who else was involved in this rebellion, in this plot. So he is asking that court officials would pledge new allegiance to him. And he is bringing the people into the Babylon just to make sure that they understand that they have to be obedient to him, they have to accept him as sovereign king and ruler. Now this comes very, very close to the events of chapter 3, where we do have the statue he built, and people who were there were supposed to bow down and pay respect. We have a list on the tablet mentioning about 100 names of the people who were invited to Babylon to pledge this new allegiance. And among these names, there are 3 names which are very similar to those 3 young men that we read in the Bible, in the book of Daniel chapter 3, they did not bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were nobility. They were friends of Daniel. They were part of the upper elite society of Jerusalem, and all 3 of them with Daniel were taken as captives to be trained in Nebuchadnezzar's court.
Those who don't bow down, which are the friends of Daniel, he has them thrown into a fiery furnace and heated up very hot. It's like a brick kiln. Nobody could survive anywhere near it. In fact, the people that threw them in were killed. But the fact that the whole image is of gold really shows that Nebuchadnezzar is rebelling against the vision of Daniel chapter 2. He's not accepting that God is just allowing him to be the head of gold. He wants to be the whole thing and go to the end and reign forever. And so he has some hard lessons to learn.
Because in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, Babylon is not a temporary kingdom. Babylon is the apex of all kingdoms. It is the unending kingdom. And so Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are this head of gold." Nebuchadnezzar must have loved that. But he didn't love what came next. Take a look at verse 39. "But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall bear rule over all the earth."
Nebuchadnezzar was listening to that and probably didn't like it, but he heard in Daniel chapter 2, 39, that after you, that's after you, Nebuchadnezzar, after the Babylonian kingdom, another kingdom will come.
Now, I'm sure that Nebuchadnezzar did not like those 2 words there, after you. But Daniel says, after you, another kingdom will arise, and then a third kingdom of bronze. So now you get a feel for what the interpretation of the dream is. The gold represents Babylon. After that, the silver represents another kingdom, and then a third kingdom of bronze, and then that critical phrase there, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Now, here's a critical thing to understand. That phrase, which shall bear rule over all the earth, lets you know that these are not mere regional or tribal powers. These are world-ruling entities, world-ruling powers. Babylon was the greatest nation of antiquity up to that point. But Babylon would be succeeded by another kingdom.
Well, the conquest of Babylon is rather interesting. The Persians come up to the city and they surround the city. Of course, from the book of Daniel's perspective, Belshazzar the king is trapped in there with his nobility, and they feel quite safe. The walls of Babylon were very sturdy, very strong.
Belshazzar knows that Cyrus is invading, that he's approaching, but he's not afraid. Babylon is invincible. It's got the walls around the city, it's got canals, it's got moats, and it's safe.
One of the key features of the city of Babylon was that the Euphrates River ran through the city. That was a source of water for the inhabitants of the city, and you couldn't just break into the city. The gates were very well constructed, and the river itself, there were special barred gates that came down into the river, making it impossible for anyone to sneak into the city through the river course.
And Babylon, in fact, was under the rule of Belshazzar when it fell, on the night that it fell, according to Daniel chapter 5, when the armies of Cyrus under this general came and they got into the walls, and the Greek historian refers to the idea that, in fact, the armies of Cyrus diverted the waters of the river Euphrates.
The Persians were able to divert the water by building a canal upstream and diverting the course of the river so that the water level going through the city actually dropped very low, and the Persian soldiers were able to slip underneath the water gate into the city itself, while the guards and other people of Babylon apparently were partying at Belshazzar's last party, and they were able to go in and take over the city that way. Once you break into the city, open up the rest of the gates, and the Persian army can race in and take over.
Belshazzar gets reports that cities are falling. So is he celebrating because he feels secure? That's what many say. Is he celebrating to drown out the fact that he knows the empire is about to fall? That's what some say. In any case, he's feasting, and he brings out the beautiful goblets and vessels that were in storage from the Israelites' sanctuary, from Solomon's temple. And they're feasting. And they get very drunk, and then they see this writing on the wall. Belshazzar is terrified of what's going on, of what he sees, and he calls for Daniel, and Daniel interprets this for him. It is a matter of time, a matter of hours before the empire is about to fall.
Babylon was the greatest nation of antiquity up to that point. But Babylon would be succeeded by another kingdom, and that kingdom would be succeeded by still another kingdom. Each of these medals representing a kingdom and then a subsequent kingdom. Okay? Babylon conquered by Mede-Persia. The Mede-Persian Empire being represented by the silver, the chest and arms. In fact, the Mede-Persian Empire is called Medo-Persia by name right in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 8.
Cyrus, king of Persia, with his general Ugbaru-Gobryas, took over in 539. Now, the Persians were a very powerful empire, and they had quite an enlightened rule in a sense. Cyrus could be brutal on various places. So, for example, there were cities that got in his way that wouldn't surrender, and he burned the whole city with men, women, and children. However, those cities that submitted to his rule, he was very nice to, and he in fact let captives go free to their homes, including the Jews, back to Judah, and he returned gods to their temples and did all kinds of things. Now, the Persian Empire went on, and of course, when a king has a big army and lots of power, he wants to expand his empire. That's every king's dream, right? So one of these kings in the 400s, his name was Xerxes. His Persian name, in Old Persian, which is his original native language, is Shayarsha. Now that was hard for the Jews to pronounce, so they said Ahasuerus. We know him as Ahasuerus. And the Greeks said Xerxes, which is Xerxes. Okay? He was the husband of Queen Esther.
The young girl Esther lived during the Persian period, during the time of Xerxes I. Now the Bible, in the biblical text, the king that eventually married this young Jewish girl was actually called Ahasuerus.
Now, I don't know what Esther called him, whether she called him Shayarsha or Ahasuerus, but in any case, that was her husband. And this guy was power hungry. He was also really weird, had a very short temper, and he wanted to conquer Greece.
He invaded Greece, expanded the Persian Empire, the son of Darius, of course, and really established these major capital cities and palaces, finished them that his father Darius had started them, but he finished them, places like Susa and Persepolis and some of these fantastic cities of the Persian Empire.
But you can imagine the Greeks never forgot what the Persians had done to them. So years later, see, this was in the 400s, over a century later, Alexander the Great rose up. His father was Philip of Macedon. Macedonia is to the north of Greece. And he then took over Greece. And the Greeks and the Macedonians had not forgotten what the Persians did, and they wanted revenge. And so they all got behind Alexander, and he went over and he defeated the main Persian army in 3 great battles, Issus, Granicus, and Arbela, in the 330s, captured Darius III, the last king.
The Greeks had been in tension with the Persians for quite some time. There had been several conflicts. The Persians had tried to invade Greece several times. And ultimately, under Alexander the Great, he was able to put a stop to the Persians once and for all in this great battle where he takes on Darius the Persian and wipes out the Persian army.
Alexander the Great, 331, on the field of Arbela, a marvelous battle in which, though he was outnumbered significantly, he defeats the Medo-Persian armies.
Alexander had assembled a group of infantry and cavalry numbering about 49,000 men. Darius outnumbered him by some estimates by 10 to 1, about 500,000 men, some estimates as high as 1 million. So you can see that Alexander was way outnumbered in that particular battle, but he had developed quite a few tactics, like the phalanx and other tactics from his father that he used very successfully in battle. And at one point in the battle, it got so intense that Darius just turned his horse around and fled, which was a signal for his entire army to do the same. And Alexander basically won battles several times that way, with Darius fleeing. If it had been a different king, if it had been a different time, and perhaps some biblical scholars quote the passage that says that God will strike fear into the hearts of kings. Perhaps this was a divine moment where God was deciding another empire was going to take over. Whatever the case may be, Alexander won when simply on human basis he shouldn't have won.
So you see this transition from Babylon to another kingdom, Medo-Persia, to a third kingdom of bronze, which shall bear rule over all the earth.
Now we come to the thighs, which are bronze. This is the Greek Empire.
That third kingdom is also mentioned exactly in Daniel chapter 8. It's the kingdom of Greece, or as it says in the Bible, Grecia. Okay? So, Babylon, then Mede-Persia, then Greece.
In other words, there is no room for interpretation here. It just labels it. So you see, there we have a historical anchor point. We know that Daniel is using these symbols, whether different kinds of metals, parts of a big image, or different animals, to refer to a succession of empires which come up and which particularly dominate the Middle East and the territory of God's people.
The Greek Empire is a very apt description for a world empire to succeed the Persian Empire. And again, that's an element Daniel seems to accurately reflect, the succession of empires.
Even though Alexander was so powerful, so intelligent, had been trained by the greatest Grecian philosopher, none other than Aristotle. Unfortunately, it turned out that Alexander, while he could conquer kingdoms and stand on top of the world, as it were, could not seem to conquer himself.
He had conquered the world, but he wasn't able to conquer his own demons, and he died in Babylon, leaving the empire no clear successor. And 4 of his generals took over: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus, who divided up the empire in different parts, which fits perfectly the picture that we have in Daniel chapter 8.
So, Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece. Now, watch what happens with the next kingdom. Very interesting, beginning in verse 40. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. He devotes more time to this 4th kingdom than any of the other kingdoms. Okay? Now, when you look at this 4th kingdom, he says it will be extremely strong, extremely potent, extremely powerful, symbolized by iron. It will crush in pieces and break all of these other kingdoms. Okay? And that kingdom is none other than the great iron monarchy of Rome. Only one kingdom would fit.
The Roman Republic turns into the Roman Empire, and it becomes yet the greatest of all of these succession of empires yet. It's the strongest. It's depicted apparently in Daniel as the kingdom of iron, and certainly Rome, in terms of its raw strength, its wealth, its riches, its glory may not have been as great as Babylon or Persia or Greece, but in terms of raw strength, none of the previous kingdoms could surpass Rome, and so iron seems an apt description for the Roman Empire.
The Roman Empire was an empire known as a military empire, an empire known for its well-trained armies, for its tenacity, for its organization.
Known for their ferocity, known for their military strength and might, as well as a well-refined culture. Now, Jesus was alive during the time of the Roman Empire, right? Jesus was nailed to a Roman cross. Jesus was watched by Roman soldiers. Jesus stood before Pontius Pilate, a Roman governor.
And of course, crucifixion and the kinds of methods that crucifixion entailed just shows again the might of the Roman Empire and their characterization in the Bible as an empire of iron.
So you have the long legs of iron, right? The long legs of iron, representing Rome, were not conquered. Rome wasn't conquered from outside by a stronger, greater, more potent military power. Rome was divided. Well, I wonder what the prophecy says about that. Let's see what it says. Verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, look at these 5 words. The kingdom shall be divided. The kingdom shall be what? Divided. The kingdom will be divided. In other words, there will not be a conquering of this 4th iron kingdom, but the division